Let's have a look at conclusion now. So when we get to the conclusion, what we will have identified is reading a report, we will have looked at a number of these different factors that we've talked about before. We will have started by thinking about whether we've got an observational or an experimental study. Did they randomly allocate or not? What is the purpose? Who is the author of it? What are their biases? Okay, think about who the audience is. Are they targeting teenagers? Are they targeting the elderly? Who are they targeting? Business people, etc. Sample size. What do you think about that sample size? Is it very small? Is it very large? Does it give you a lot of information? Limited information. Our response rate, 10%, 50%, 8%. What is our response rate? What do we think about that? Do we think that's a good thing? Do we think that it leaves a lot to be desired? What would our evaluation of this be? Sampling frame. Who is not represented, so over or underrepresented? Have we got census or a sample? What sampling method was used? Is it a random one? Is it a biased one? How do we think about that one? What would be better? Why? What survey method was used? Face-to-face, online, pen and paper? What method was used? What are some of the advantages or disadvantages? Okay. Are there any graphs given? Are those graphs being produced well? Are they misleading in some way? What claims have they made? Have they used suggestive words? Have they talked about causality? What are the wording that they've used? So we need to put all of that together to come up with an overall evaluation and say, okay, as a whole, what do I think about this survey and this report? Do I think it is well written with a good sample size and a good sampling method that's been used, and therefore I have a lot of trust, a lot of confidence in the results? Or do I think that they didn't use a random sampling method, it was a biased method, they were volunteers, there was only a sample of 10 people taken, so that's not a lot of information. So therefore I don't have a lot of confidence in this results. So that's what we want to do, is we want to pull all of this information together now to form an overall evaluations. So let's have a look at some questions here, some exercise questions. Do conclusions from a questionnaire need to be accurate? Yes, they do. Okay. Whatever the data suggests needs to be written in suggestive language, and care needs to be taken with discussing who these results apply to. Okay, if I'm doing a report about a new drug and I talk about how it's wonderful and it does all of these wonderful things, but in actual fact I've only tested it on 20 people that are between the ages of 10 and 20, that means that actually I cannot talk about it being suitable for everybody. I do not have evidence of that. Okay, so any conclusions need to be supported with statistical evidence. Okay. So why do some companies, scientists, politicians, or other people try to mislead people with incorrect data, incorrect graphs, incorrect conclusions? Okay, so this comes back to that whole idea about purpose. Many companies have a vested interest in selling their product. So will stretch the truth further to try and convince people that their product is better. The data may or may not support their claims. Okay, but their purpose is self-interest. Okay? Should we trust everything that has ever been written in a newspaper, magazine, website, journal, book, etc.? No. All right, absolutely not. What we need to be able to do is we need to be able to verify this from multiple sources. We need to look at the quality of the methods that have been used, the sample sizes. Was it random methods? Was it an experiment? We need to look at all of these things together, and with all of this information, then we can start coming to some conclusions. But one person could randomly decide, you know what? I think that putting a rock on your head will cure your cancer. That's one person's opinion. They might write about it on a blog. Does it make it true? No, unfortunately not. So we need to be very careful about how when we read stuff, to critique it and think about where this information has come and what evidence is there to support that information. Okay? How can we decide whether or not to trust a statistical report? By evaluating many of the statistical ideas given above, e.g. what sample size was used. Was the data collected by an independent researcher or by a company trying to prove something? Okay. Was a random sampling method used? Etc., etc. And putting all of this information together helps us form an opinion about whether I trust the report a little bit, a fair amount. I've got a lot of confidence in it. So it gives us a kind of a gauge for how much will I trust it. So putting this information all together will allow me to think about how much I trust the report as a whole. Do I trust it a little, a moderate amount, or a lot? And what is the evidence? I can use to make this decision. Okay, there we go.